You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello, and welcome to Chthonia. My name is Breege Burke, and I am your host. This week is a little, it's kind of a weird transitional week for me. It was Thanksgiving. Last week, I had been at the American Academy of Religion conference before Thanksgiving in San Diego, and picked myself up, actually, a really cool Santa Muerte statue, which now I have at home and sits with a lot of my others. I should probably will post. I did post a photo of it to my Facebook page, but I will try to post that elsewhere as well, because I thought it was it was the bridal Santa Muerte, which was quite cool. But this episode, not to sidetrack too much on that. This is a rather late episode, just because of I've been traveling, and the episode that I was going to do on the Black Madonna had to be postponed. Just because of some, unforeseen difficulties. So, which is fine. We'll hopefully, it would actually be nice if we could have that episode for the Christmas holiday, because Madonna and Child, Christmas, it seems like it would fit in, but it's entirely possible that it might be later than that. And that's fine. We'll just, we'll roll with it, and we'll see what's next. But I decided to take this week as sort of an interim episode and talk about a topic that I know quite a bit about, just sort of off the top of my head. And that is about what I'm going to call Artemis, about the goddess Artemis, okay, or what I will call the Wrath of Artemis. Now, Artemis, technically, those who are following this as, having to do with the chthonic gods will immediately say, well, Artemis is not chthonic. I mean, Artemis is an Olympian. She's one of the celestial deities. She's associated with purity. She's associated with virginity. And she's also the goddess of the hunt. Her Roman counterpart is the goddess Diana. And as I've said in other episodes, she is also sort of the upper light world version of Hecate, if you will. And there's an interesting ancient connection there. So the question would be then, why would we classify Artemis with chthonic deities? And the answer is actually, there's two or three answers to that question. A lot of it has to do with her origins, what kind of a deity she was originally. Okay, because it was very clear that she was an older goddess, probably from the Phrygia area, and that she was probably an ancient mother goddess who was later sort of combined with and subsumed by, some other deities, when the Olympian pantheon was put together, when that cult of the 12 came together, or at least the Greek version of the cult of the 12. So she is, so just some basic background on Artemis herself. I think most people are probably, I would say anybody who's learned anything sort of basics of Greek mythology has heard of Artemis. But in case you haven't, or just need to be reminded, she and the god Apollo are twins. They are the children of the god Zeus and Leto, and Leto is actually technically a Titan. Because Apollo and Artemis were born probably at the time when Zeus and Hera were, when Zeus and Hera were first married, Leto was already pregnant, and this made Hera very, very upset. And if you follow the sort of drama of the marital relationships of the Greek gods, we know that the cycle is that Zeus and Hera are married, they have children of their own, but Zeus constantly desiring other women, and when he gets himself involved with those other women, and those women bear their children, whether they be demigods, whether they be other gods, whatever it is, Hera has absolute jealous fits, but she does not take out on her husband, because she cannot, as king of the gods, or, she takes it out a little more passive-aggressively, but she does take it out on the women. So she will turn them into something, or like in the sense of, Io being changed into a cow, for example, with many, or actually, was she? I'm trying to remember which way that went. If she was changed into a cow, or if she was just had a cow with many eyes that was set over to watch her. I'm trying to remember exactly which way that went. In any case, a lot of times the women who became involved with Zeus, whether they did so willingly or not, and in many cases it may not, maybe even it wasn't unwilling, just unknowing that they were mating with Zeus. She does tend to take it out on the women and on their children. So Hera herself has sort of her own dark side. But Artemis, with Leto, basically Hera would not allow anybody to, basically said, try to keep her from giving birth on land. And eventually, the island of Delos, basically went against Hera's wishes and allowed Leto to be there and to give birth to the twins. So, of course, Hera did not care for the island of Delos, but it became sacred to Artemis and to Apollo in particular. And there was a temple of Apollo, an oracle at Delos as well. Now, the other part of that particular birth story is that the birth goddess, Eileithyia, that Hera detained her so that Leto would not have the midwife there to help her give birth. So Artemis supposedly was born first and then assisted helping her mother deliver Apollo. So they're twins, technically. Other versions, sometimes Apollo's a little older than Artemis. Again, like these stories can vary. But she's been around for a while. I mean, her temple at Ephesus, which shows a very different Artemis. Now, some people say she's many-breasted. Others say, no, those aren't breasts. Those are just large beads on her, decorated with many, many beads, but they look like many breasts, which implies a little bit, which nonetheless, even if regardless of what that intention is, it does give her a little bit more of a, it implies something a little bit more of on the way of a fertility deity or a mother goddess. And Artemis, interestingly, one of the main things she's associated with is chastity and virginity, as well as the hunt. Okay, and this makes her dark in her own kind of a way. We tend to think of purity and chastity, they're the good Christian female values, right? I mean, that this is what people are supposed to obey. Artemis was the one who enforced that girls did not have sex before they were married. Okay, in ancient Greek times. This idea was there, to try to, the integrity or the, whatever you want to call that. Artemis was the one responsible for it, but she wasn't particularly nice about it. And so this is something, but at the same time, I think I'm saying she's also associated with childbirth and with helping women who are in the pains of childbirth. But she's also associated with violent death of children. So we can see we've kind of got this, like a lot of the Greek gods, Artemis is extremely complex. And I would like to actually focus in this episode on a couple of different aspects of her, the sort of the darker or wrathful aspects. One is sort of what I'm going to call the plague aspect, the Artemis who brings sudden and violent death. And which she shares with her brother, by the way. I mean, if you almost every Greek tragedy that you read, the ones that we have, starts with a plague that's been sent by Apollo. The Iliad starts with a plague that's been sent by Apollo. Was the Oedipus? How does Oedipus be exposed as the murderer of Laius? Because a plague is brought on the city of Thebes, so sent by Apollo. So there's always a So the twins are very much associated with plague, as much as they're associated with all these other things that we tend to think of. Again, her being a hunter, her being a virgin, with Apollo, with his, he's sort of associated with, poetry and inspiration and sort of light and civilization. He becomes kind of almost equivalent of the sun god, even though he's not Helios per se. He is, Apollo does become, associated, just as Artemis ends up becoming associated with the moon. They have this, the fact is that they are not just simply these, the way that we tend to think in good and evil terms. They are not simply these quote unquote deities of light. They have their aspects and their attributes that are, frankly, just in my view, very, very honest. This is sort of what it is. This is, and we get ourselves caught up when we say, but this deity, or this one's supposed to be all good or supposed to stand for this. How come this happened? Well, because I can't pretend to know the nature of God, but I suspect that it's not quite so cut, dried, and compartmentalized as people sometimes like to think. It's a suspicion anyway. So we're going to talk about the plagues, and I also want to talk about Artemis's association with animals, okay, and how animals figure into her wrathful aspect, particularly when it comes to chastity, and particularly the chastity of young girls, especially young girls who are about to enter into their what was considered to be the proper social female adult life, where they move from being kore to being gine to being Parthenos, which when they basically become parents. Okay. Because there's a sense that Artemis does not, because she is somebody who guards virginity so closely, that she does not look very favorably on women giving up their virginity. So there's certain rites that must be performed in order for the young girls to safely pass without being slain by Artemis or by a similar force, and thus leaving them as aore, these wandering ghosts who don't, liminal spirits who are neither in the world of the dead or the living. Or become assistants of the Furies. If you go back to the podcasts that I've done on Hecate, on the Erinyes, or the Furies, and also the one on the Hanging Virgins, there's a lot of information there that I'm going to try not to repeat here, being I've already discussed it in one place. But do feel free to go back and review those. Those are all on Chthonia.net and also metapsychosis.com/series/Chthonia. All the episodes are there. So if you haven't heard those for whatever reason, you're welcome to go back and have a listen for more background on this. So let me start here. I want to start by talking about Artemis and her association with plague. In particular, there's one story, and that is the story of Niobe. Okay, Niobe was a queen of Thebes. Now Thebes always, just kind of like some of the others, tends to be kind of a central place. Her father is Tantalus. Okay, Tantalus is the one who ends up he's one of the few people who pisses the gods off enough that he ends up in Tartarus, where if he tries to drink from a pool of water that he's standing in, because he's thirsty, it recedes away from him. And if he tries to pick the fruit that's very, looks tantalizing, hence the word, right above his head, it pulls away from him if he tries to reach for it. And this is his punishment for killing his son, cooking him, and feeding him to the gods, as sort of as a test to see whether or not they would know that this was human flesh. And so that violates all kinds of taboos. There's actually a class I teach, a myth class, within the mythology segment that I teach on cannibalism and mythology. And how cannibalism in these particular mythologies taints, the way you're showing that it corrupts the family line, just the way incest does. There's this idea of the father devouring the son before the son, rather than the son becoming an emanation of the father who can then go out into the world, that the father devours him. Well, of course, the gods restore Pelops, who is his, who's the son who was killed. And, and so Pelops, Pelops goes on to make a whole other host of mistakes of his own, but Niobe is his sister. Okay. And, so she lives on Delos. She's a queen of Thebes, but but Leto had, there was basically a general right. There were rites to Leto that were performed as, honoring the mother of Apollo and Artemis. And she was, and so she was sort of disdainful of these ceremonies, and her thing was, now again, it depends on the version. In most versions, she has 7 girls and 7 boys. She has all these children. In other versions, in the tragedies, she has 10 sons and 10 daughters. There's at least one writer who claims that she has 5, 3 girls and 2 boys, something like that. Regardless, she's got a lot of kids. And so Niobe says, I don't see why I should worship Leto, who only had 2 children, where look at all these children that I have. I'm a better mother than she is. And it's very interesting, these acts of sort of hubris of saying that one is better than the gods. Something, it's something that mortals just don't seem to learn from. But I guess the idea is this idea that, you think your fertility is so much better. But Leto, of course, is not going to tolerate this slight, so she asks her 2 children to avenge her, and they do. What they do is they, Artemis, Apollo killed her sons as they practiced athletics. Artemis shot the daughters and died instantly without a sound. Now, in some versions, I'm actually going to look at a version that I have here. Here we go. All right, so I'll just read this story from, this is Pierre Gramal's Dictionary of Classical Myth. He gives the different versions here. Happy and proud of her children, Niobe declared that she was superior to Leto, who only had 1 son and 1 daughter. The goddess felt offended and asked Apollo and Artemis to avenge her. The 2 deities slaughtered the children of Niobe with their arrows. Artemis killed the girls, Apollo the boys. Only 1 boy and 1 girl were saved, and in some versions none of them were. The latter became pallid with terror. She took the name Chloris, meaning green, and later married Neleus, who's one of the, I think Neleus is one of, related to one of the Oceanids. In the Iliad, the children of Niobe remain unburied for 10 days. In the 11th, the gods themselves buried them. In more recent version, Niobe fled to Tantalus, her father, at Sipylus, or to Mount Sipylus in Asia Minor, where she was changed into a rock by the gods. Her eyes continued to weep, however, and people were shown the rock which had once been Niobe, from which a spring flowed. There was another version of the Niobe legend in which Niobe was the daughter of Asaon, who had married her to an Assyrian named Philotas. The latter was killed during a hunt, and Asaon became enamored of his own daughter. She refused to yield. Asaon then asked his grandchildren to a feast, during which he set fire to the palace and burned them all alive. Stricken with remorse, Asaon killed himself. Niobe was either changed to a stone or threw herself from the top of a rock. So that's a very different version. But the basic one is the idea that she has offended Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis, by saying she was superior because she had more children, and so they slay all her children and turn her to stone. Okay, not a very nice or pleasant outcome, and it was so you have this idea of the murder of children. Okay. Some of Artemis's other things that she's done, some of her less well-known ones. She saves Atalanta, who's going to be put out for exposure, sending a female bear to suckle the baby. We're going to talk about bears in a minute. Artemis later sent a bear to hurt Atalanta because others claimed Atalanta was a superior hunter. Again, you don't make yourself better than the gods. Now another one called Aura. This is rather interesting. Aura was the daughter of Lelantos and Periboea. She was a virgin huntress just like Artemis and proud of her maidenhood. One day she claimed the body of Artemis was too womanly and she doubted her virginity. Artemis asked Nemesis for help to avenge her dignity and caused the rape of Aura by Dionysus. Okay, Dionysus, the god of wine. We'll have to do an episode on him too, even though he's not a chthonic female. He has a lot to do with it. Aura became a mad and dangerous killer. When she bore twin sons, she ate one of them, while the other one, Iacchus, was saved by Artemis. Iacchus later became an attendant of Demeter and the leader of the Eleusinian mysteries. Oh, this is an interesting way to tie Artemis and Demeter and Eleusis, which is where trying to kind of tying her into that, and there's another, there's sort of this other aspect of this where Artemis becomes almost the sort of, on a spectrum, she becomes sort of the opposite of Aphrodite. But Aphrodite is somebody she also still has respect for. There's the story of Hippolytus. Okay, Hippolytus is a young man who has dedicated himself to Artemis and who is very chaste. But he rejects sexuality, he rejects women, he rejects everything about women. He's hateful of it. He's disdainful of anybody who deals with love or sex or anything like that. And of course, this angers Aphrodite. And so what Aphrodite did was she made his stepmother. This was he was a son of Theseus. Okay, Theseus, the same Theseus who fought the Minotaur. Okay, who was king of Athens. But he had married a woman named Phaedra. Aphrodite made Phaedra fall in love with Hippolytus. This was his stepmother. And he tried to get him to go to bed with her. He refused, of course. But then she went and told Theseus that she was raped by Hippolytus. So he didn't investigate the story. He just simply had Hippolytus chained to the back of a chariot and dragged to his death. It was only later on that he realized that his wife had been lying. And, and he had, grief-stricken at having killed his own son. But this was Aphrodite's revenge. So there's kind of another flip side to this, that those who espouse virginity to, too much, that they risk the wrath of, those who embrace Artemis too much risk the wrath of Aphrodite. And you can probably think about that in a almost metaphorical way, that there needs to be a balance between, perhaps relationship and, what we might think of as pure or chaste behavior, that there needs to be a balance there, that in some fashion that sex and coming into relationship and love is also a natural part of life, and that to reject that side of you is problematic as well. It's, you may feel different ways at different points in your life, but to say that one is superior to the other can generally lead to problems. To me, I'm almost reminded of, I find myself thinking of the scandals with the priests, where they're sworn to a life of chastity, but then they start sexually abusing little boys and make them stay quiet about it. So to me, and then of course they're exposed, and well, of course the church doesn't do as much about it as they or should, or at least they haven't in the past. But there's this idea of these sort of the way in which which a life of chastity can lead one to lead one down a wrong path. We can't say that with Hippolytus, because he was sort of the victim of somebody who lied about him, but Phaedra lied at the behest of Aphrodite. She was getting back at him, just like she would get back at a lot of Trojan warriors who wronged her, or I should say Greek warriors in the Trojan War, by making their wives unfaithful. So there's this kind of Artemis Aphrodite like axis here. So similarly, Artemis is somebody who's associated. She's associated. So while she's a virgin, that would be associated with not bearing children. At the same time, Artemis does have a connection to children, but she and her brother are also very much responsible for violent death in children. So that's probably the most notable story, is the one of Niobe. Now, so there's that aspect of her that's a little bit what we would call darker. The other interesting one has to do with animals, particularly now. Artemis is particularly associated with bears, stags, and at least in one place with bulls. And bulls are interesting because they tend to be a fertility symbol. Bears, if you know your Jungian archetypes, the bear tends to be a manifestation, sort of in dream imagery and other places, of what we call the terrible mother, the angry, devouring mother. And not because bears are devouring, but because they are so ferociously protective of their young. I remember my sister telling me a story about when she lived in Pennsylvania, and there was a guy in their development, I guess, because they lived very, very far out in the woods, who had accidentally hit a bear cub, like it ran out in front of his car. And he had gotten out of the car and gone away, and it was a good thing he did, because Mama Bear came out of the wood, picked up his car, and actually demolished it. If he had been in it, he would have been dead, because she was just furious that her cub had been killed. And so she was going to destroy whatever had killed her cub. So there's kind of there's that aspect, that terrifying aspect. And in some dreams, the bear does represent that towering feminine influence, which is absolutely frightening. So the bear, in some ways, is almost the heart of the destructive feminine, in terms of a symbol. And Artemis is very much associated with bears. Like I said, bears and stags. I talked in the Hanging Virgins about the story of Iphigenia. Iphigenia herself was probably an ancient goddess that kind of sort of got rolled into different things. But Iphigenia began. Now again, Artemis was on the side of the Trojans in the Trojan War, probably because her brother Apollo was the patron of that city. Okay. So she tended to side with Troy rather than with Greece. And before the war starts, there's a play by Euripides called Iphigenia at Taurus. And Taurus, of course, has to do with bull, or with bulls. But I'm sorry, not at Taurus, Iphigenia at Olus. I'm getting myself mixed up. There is an Iphigenia at Taurus as well, but that has to do with what happens after. So Iphigenia at Olus. Okay, so the Greek ships are stuck there. They cannot get to Troy because there is no wind. And they are told that it's because either somebody killed a favorite stag of Artemis's, or that somebody insulted her hunting ability. And so one of the main Greek generals was going to have to pay with human sacrifice. Now, understand that human sacrifice was completely and totally non-acceptable in ancient Greece. Okay, it was not done. You only hear about it in some of these very, very specialized kind of circumstances. And so when the oracle tells them that, it's decided that Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, will be brought. But she's brought under a pretext. They lie to her mother, Clytemnestra, and they tell her that she's being brought to be married to Achilles. So her mother is delighted. She's come, she's dressed for a wedding, they bring the people, all those things. And instead they take her to the altar and they kill her. Now, supposedly, now in some versions of it, they sort of silence her because she doesn't want to be sacrificed. And also the idea of an unwilling sacrifice is extremely inauspicious, just so you know. If an animal shows a lot of distress during the sacrifice, then they said that's actually a very bad sign. The animal's not going willingly. And certainly Iphigenia, as the human sacrifice, was not going willingly. And this was actually the where Clytemnestra's rage against Agamemnon comes from, and why she eventually kills her husband, because she's enraged at him taking their daughter and lying about it, just so he could have favorable winds for his battle. And so so Iphigenia is sacrificed, and then there's different, in the Euripides play, she goes very nobly. However, in the other versions, she struggles a lot. They have to, stop her from screaming. And what she does is, they said, it's like she shakes herself. She shakes her robe off, and she tries to reach to the elders sort of for pity. And that shaking they said, is reminiscent of what a bear does when it shakes like its fur, or gets rid of some of its fur. How is it? Let me see just how this is explained here. I just want to find this here. I have it written. Yes. A final act of desperation, she shrugs out of her robes and tries wordlessly to reach out to the elders, hoping that in pity they will release her from her hell. Iphigenia's shedding of her robes is an act done by the quote-unquote bears of Brorian Artemis. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in a second. As depicted by vases which show the bears having shed their robes and naked, an act which is significant in the fulfillment of a bear's career. The idea that the bear sheds its fur, really. Iphigenia makes the original sacrifice, and these quote-unquote bears continue the ritual by shedding their saffron robes. So the idea of Artemis at Broron, the Broron rituals have to do with women behaving like bears, okay? And when they say that, that's what they mean, that they shed these robes. Now, others say it's because someone killed a bear sacred to Artemis, and now and they said that she sent a plague that would cease if the Athenians would consecrate their daughters to the bear Artemis every 5 years. And it says, Artemis was worshipped as the great she-bear, and girls required to undergo a period of ritual wildness before puberty were her images. The arctoi, and often wore bear masks in rituals. Okay, that's interesting. So on the one hand, there may be this Iphigenia connection, because Iphigenia, it is said, again, differing versions of that outcome. Iphigenia either is sacrificed. Most of the time, though, Artemis grabs her at the last minute and replaces her with a deer. And instead, she makes her a priestess first at Taurus. Okay, that's where I got myself confused there. That's where the bull association, and then later at Broron, which is the bear association. And very likely Iphigenia was some other local ancient deity that has kind of gotten rolled in. Hesiod, in his version, I believe it's in the Catalogue of Women, he talks about Iphigenia. He mentions the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and said instead Artemis took her away, and Iphigenia became the goddess Hecate. Okay, now and again, more on that in the Hecate episode. But Hecate is also, I've said this in the other episode, that I feel that she is sort of the underworld version of Artemis. They both have a pack of hounds that they run with. Hecate just does so at night under the moon, across the crossroads. Both of them do have kind of an association with the moon, different phases of the moon. And which is probably where Wiccans get a lot of the idea about, virgin maiden crone, with Hecate sort of representing the crone aspect and Artemis representing the virgin aspect. I'm not going to say that that's historically Greek, but I don't think that's really... I'm not sure that the evidence supports that. Nonetheless, it's not hard to see where that idea comes from. And again, they both kind of, Hecate, running through the underworld with her torch and her dogs, and Artemis in the upper world. And Iphigenia is kind of a linking figure. But again, there's kind of a sense that both Hecate and Iphigenia may have been older goddesses associated with young girls with these transitions, and that they kind of got rolled into the Artemis myth in their own way. I mean, Hecate sort of has her own... her own set of complexities, but Artemis is, she's a contradiction in a lot of ways with this. But in any case, Iphigenia, if you consider the fact that she was a virgin girl who allegedly was about to be married, she snatches her away before that event can take place. So either way, I mean, in Iphigenia at Taurus, Clytemnestra actually says at the end, it doesn't, even when the priest says, Artemis came and took her away, she says, well, it doesn't matter. I still don't have my daughter either way. So So that was certainly Euripides' take on it. So this idea of this rite of Boron, this was a rite that girls had to perform, not only to stave off plague, but also this was something that what they did, this wildness that they had to do before they enter puberty. So in other words, before they enter their childbearing years. It's like a rite of appeasement by behaving like bears. Now, speaking of bears and Artemis, there's a couple. Well, there's one about a stag and one about a bear. Let's start with the one about the bear, okay? And that is the myth of Callisto. Callisto was the daughter of Lycaon, the king of Arcadia. And Lycaon actually has his own sort of animalistic origins, but not to sidetrack. She was one of Artemis's hunting attendants. As a companion of Artemis, she took a vow of chastity. Zeus appeared to her disguised as Artemis, or in some stories as Apollo, to gain her confidence and took advantage of her. Or, according to Ovid, simply raped her. As a record of this encounter, she conceived a son named Arcas. Okay, so enraged, Artemis, and in some versions Hera, because it's got to do with Zeus, some say both, changed her into a bear. And when she ran through the woods, she encountered her son who had grown up, and he was hunting, and he almost killed, and he was going to slay his own mother, because she was looking at him and trying to plead with him that this is his mother, but he doesn't know that. He's about to kill her, but then Zeus stops him, and out of pity, he places both of them, places Callisto into the heavens. And in some versions, both Arcas and Callisto are placed in the heavens, and that they are the constellations of Ursa Minor and Ursa Major, the Great Bear and the Little Bear, okay? With the mother being the Great Bear and the son being the Little Bear. And supposedly, too, this is where Hera also asks Tethys, who is the goddess of, she's kind of the goddess of fresh waters, but she's also... she also appeals to the, deals with the constellations and the skyline, the skyline, the horizon line. And so she never allows them to go a certain point beyond the horizon, which is interesting, just in her anger over that. So there again, we see a dark side of Artemis. You break the vow of chastity, you get turned into a bear. And so the Boron ritual is almost like, okay, you're going to behave like a bear beforehand. It's sort of like, maybe it's a way of sort of tricking Artemis into thinking like, okay, you're about to commit this, deed. You've already been in some way. You've already been turned into a bear. Whether it's just getting one's wildness out before they have to settle down to what was considered to be sort of a proper life as a head of a household. Don't know. You could probably make cases for a lot of these things if you want to. Not something I've researched in any great depth, but interesting thought. The other kind of transformation story there is the one of Actaeon. And just find it here. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, and there's different versions. They're often fragmented. But the core of them, you have a hunter named Actaeon, whom Artemis turns into a stag because supposedly his transgression is that he witnesses her naked while she's bathing. And he doesn't turn his face away. So when she sees this, she, because again, she's a virgin goddess, she's not going to be looked upon naked by a man. She turns him into a stag, and then his own dogs are set upon him and they kill him. Okay. And in some versions, of course, these are Artemis's hounds who go after him. But, so again, there's this transformation. The man turned into a stag, or in some cases, Iphigenia. Other cases, we're talking about bears associated with women, and, the men being turned into stags, which is kind of interesting. That is certainly her sacred animal. And there are certain stags, of course, like in the Labors of Heracles. There is the stag that he takes it away, and of course Artemis pursues him, and he says, "No, I'm not going to kill your stag. I just need to show, he just needed to show the king that he had picked up the stag." And then he would bring it back to her. So she allowed it, being it was one of the labors that he had to complete. But it took him about a year to catch it. So in any case, we see this connection with that. And then, of course, her connection at Taurus, which is more associated with the bull. And actually is a little bit more of a fertility association there because of the association of bulls with fertility. Particularly, well, I don't know, both masculine and feminine fertility, really. If you want to look at some of those... some of the way that those myths have been interpreted, certainly in ancient Mycenae and ancient Minoan Crete. So so Artemis is sort of her wrathful aspect seems to be largely centered around children, childbirth, and rites of passage, which makes her kind of a very liminal, almost chthonic figure. It's like you have to appease Artemis before you can pass through the next gate, before you can go to the next stage. And it's, and so it makes it, so she becomes, so she's sort of this very almost, it makes her almost a very, very dark figure. She has sort of an underworld quality. This is the test you must pass. She's the feminine test that you must pass. In other words, if you're going to give up your virginity, you have to give it up in the right way through these sort of animalistic rituals to Artemis. Okay. And if you don't do that, you risk being cut off, her destroying you or cutting you off at a point in your life when you are not able to, not be able to bear children or do what quote unquote normal women were supposed to do at that point in time. I mean, we would have, and again, try to think about this. It's very easy to think about all of these things on the social level, especially now when, there's a lot more discussion of gender and differences in gender or multiple genders other than just simply being, male or female. Just try to remember that this is kind of functioning on an archetypal level. It's talking about more about possibly biological passages through life. As certainly the woman, as we talk about in the Hanging Virgins, the woman who dies but does not bleed. Okay, so therefore she has not reached a menarche. She has not, does not have, hasn't had her period yet. I'm just right now, I'm actually just looking at my own book, Death and the Maiden, because I actually do have a thing where I talk about Artemis. I make note of the fact that she, in the Iliad, Artemis is almost treated like she's like a young girl who runs away and cries, when things don't go her way. She says Hera strikes her at some point when she upbraids her brother for not taking part in the battle. But Hera, of course, who's on the side of the Greeks, strikes her and says cruel things to her, and the arrows fall scattered on the ground, and Artemis runs off in tears to be comforted by her father Zeus, leaving Leto, her mother, to pick up the arrows. Okay, Homer almost makes her sound like she's like some silly young girl. And I don't know, you could see almost a little bit of the attitudes towards femininity here, or towards her, I don't know. I don't know if it's actually kind of like a childish disdain for her, like Artemis is not maturely participating in the woman's life by giving up her virginity. I don't know where that inflection comes from in Homer, but you don't see it anywhere else. Okay. And of course I did talk about the Niobe story. I think I took my version from the Iliad. And let's just see. Yeah, and I have in here, Artemis has a role as a moon goddess, and the temple of the Artemis at Ephesus was considered one of the 7 wonders of the world. Artemis represented there had many breasts, or some say many beads, but certainly they look like breasts, making her more of a mother figure. It's hard to separate the feminine and masculine aspects of her character, and it may suggest that the natural world reflects a combination of masculine and feminine elements working together, and that there's a bit of each in the other, sort of like the yin-yang symbol. And then I skip over, I say, the contradictory collection of associations may also indicate the ancient nature of Artemis, like Demeter and Hera. She is form of an older pre-Greek deity, and her various associations coming together in one figure. However, the fact that the Greeks accepted these contradictions suggested they were accepting of the complex nature of the feminine, consciously or not. Okay. Now, again, I'm very specific about making the distinction about the feminine and women. Okay, they're not the same thing. Men have feminine characteristics, women have masculine characteristics. We are talking about the feminine in its most sort of primal archetypal state. And the myth of Artemis is very much tied up in this, and again, having to do with, we tend to think in, again, if you come from a Christian background, you may see virginity and chastity as and sort of obedience to this social norm as a, as the proper thing to do, as the right thing for a woman to do, or a way to behave. An idea that I think, I'm sure, I know it still exists. Certainly, we have these purity balls. I think I've talked about those before, which I find just, I don't know. The people who do them, they say, oh no, they're wonderful, or they're this or that. I'm like, they're just really offensive to me in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of incestuous implications. Okay, even though they say no, that's not what they're about, and their fathers are not like that, and so forth. Yeah, okay, you're not like that, but the ritual itself has an incestuous association. I'm sorry, whether you know it or not. Just like eating birthday cake has a cannibalistic one, although that's not quite so freaky, really. I mean, we don't, I think we're so far removed from that one. But when you go to a ball where you dress in white and you go with daddy and it says, the Lord is your husband and your father is your boyfriend, I'm sorry. I think that there's just, even if it's not meant, quote unquote, in that way, I think as somebody said to me, well, then, as one of my students once said, they said, well, then why do they say it that way? It's like, yeah, I don't, I have a problem with this idea because purity seems to have more to do with bride price and dowry. And, and there's just a lot of things to me outside of hygiene, personal hygiene, and staving off of illness. I find that purity is very questionable in all other venues. But Artemis is sort of that representation of purity, and it's almost that wrathful aspect. She's almost a representation of, women. Interesting. Ironically, what happens to women who don't have children, or who don't, fulfill that function in some way, or don't follow that particular script. She's sort of like the scary figure who's supposed to sort of keep you from, in the way that, say, Marmo or Gela or even Lilith were seen as figures who might steal your children away. She's somebody who might steal you away before you even had a chance to commit, engage in the sex act. And of course, if you did it outside of what was socially acceptable, there were other punishments for that as well. As we see, whether it be through, and again, the question of whether or not it's rape, or whether or not, it's a willing girl who has to say that she's raped. Which again, and again, you want to go back to particularly the Persephone episode that I have. I talk a lot more about that, and because that's the thing that can very easily be misunderstood. So if you heard that and went, what? And you haven't heard the Persephone episode of Chthonia, please go back and listen to that, because I explain in great detail. I don't want to re-explain it all here. But I do. So I guess what we do want to get down to is that Artemis actually serves a very sort of chthonic function. She has to do with this fundamental earthiness. The girl at Menach, at this point where she's going to enter into womanhood. And we've talked in many other episodes about the dangers of that. Artemis is the figure that, to one, performs the rituals and who has to be appeased. Whether it's the swinging rituals having to do with the hanging virgins, singing the, Aletis, the Song of the Wanderer, whether it's them behaving like bears, either to imitate the sacrifice of Iphigenia, or whether it is related to these other aspects of Artemis, as connected to the Great Bear. Okay, in particular, like I said, the bear and the stag. She's usually pictured with a stag, and also boars. She's also been known to send wild boars, and if we recall from the episode on Kirke, which was the last one, a lot of these have to do with taming sexual elements, I think. The bear is the very protective mother, but certainly bulls and certainly boars sort of represent that sort of very crass. They can, they can be very violent in their nature. But when I think about Kirke turning men into pigs, men who give in, who are overcome by certain desires, and who potentially can behave in ways that are more animalistic than, say, respectful or whatever else one might. And what else one might interpret that. Certainly, we know what we think of as eros or desire happens on a spectrum. But that's a whole topic in and of itself that I don't want to digress too much into that. But certainly there's this idea of needing to maybe, perhaps actually, because that is the age where one's hormones are raging the most, that, staving off the possible negative effects of animalistic love, of, where, when you're 12, you have your first boyfriend and you think, oh, we're going to live together forever. We're going to be married. And, no, that's just not, that is not an age where you need to even be thinking about that. I realize there are cultures where girls are married off at that age, but and perhaps even have gone into puberty and are capable of bearing children at that point. But psychologically, it's just, particularly in Western culture, that's just too early. That's not even something that should be a consideration. And, and that does sort of raise the interesting questions about, sexuality, the dawning of sexuality, and what that means. It's obviously a very, very special thing. I mean, if you just consider the very fact that women are able to create at this point, they're able to create other humans, obviously not by themselves, but, but it's, it's still, there is such a cult surrounding this, about the importance of this, about the importance of kind of using this sacred energy in what was considered to be the right way, or the socially acceptable way, or the way that was going to be beneficial to the society. So probably Artemis, in her as the Olympian, as sort of the enforcer of order, gets involved with these, and her darker aspects are more the threats of what will happen to you if you step outside the order, or what dangers, or more I think more to the point. I don't think it's necessarily quite that didactic. More about trying to meet head on the dangers that one can face during this sort of transitional period in life. Okay, so I think I want to stop there. I think those are sort of all the basics. Those are the two main things I really wanted to discuss regarding Artemis. Was her sort of, I help you birth children and I also kill them, and also her association with these sort of devouring feminine figures, or these figures that tend to represent fertility or desire, in seeming contradiction to what she is, but the way in which she sort of acts as a controlling force on these sort of chthonic impulses, and her relationship to other chthonic deities, of which she may have originally been one. She may have been a mother goddess at one point that became broken out into this kind of role. So with that, I'm going to say thanks again for listening this week. Again, there should be some more collaborations in the future. I will have more information as we go on, and we'll see what the next episode is. I want to say, please visit Chthonia.net. I'm like I said, I've said this several episodes now, but I'm going to be in the process over the winter of upgrading that and fixing it up, and trying to make it a little bit more. Right now, I'm like, I'd like to add a blog to it. I'd like to add some more updates. Right now, it's just kind of like, okay, all the content is there, and you can go through it pretty easily. But at the same time, I feel like it could be a little more organized and efficient. So, but I need some help with that. So, working on Chthonia. Also, this series is sponsored by Metapsychosis and the Cosmos Co-op. So if you go to metapsychosis.com/series/Chthonia, you can also see where all of these episodes are housed and are at home. You can also subscribe through iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, whatever your favorite podcast service is. I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/Chthonia. And so if you would like to support my work, I'd very much appreciate that. And again, big thank you to those who already do support my work. I'm hoping to do some more things, being able to offer some more, classes, services, other things, besides just doing the podcast. So if you're on Patreon, you'll be up to date on all that stuff. And I'm hoping now to have some, I've been trying to, if my life has kind of ended up in a disarray for like the last 2 months due to completely unforeseen circumstances. So there's some things I've actually wanted to do even this past month, with giveaways and some other things that just haven't panned out. So my apologies for that. But I hope to get this together for the new year. So if you're interested, check it out. And again, thanks to my patrons. And with that, I will see you in the next episode.